Hello! In this tutorial, we will see how to insert and work with plant species. We'll start by inserting individual plants and editing them from the Edit panel. Then, we'll take a look at the extensive plant database that Lance Design provides, and we'll learn how to create new species. We will continue by inserting plants in paint mode and from points. We will see how to arrange plants in rows in forests that can be created from boundaries, from zones, or for vertical gardens, as well as shrubs and ground covers. We will start by inserting plants. We'll try different options. We can insert plants individually, from a selection of points, or in paint mode. We can arrange them in rows, forest, shrubs, and ground covers. If we click on the first icon, the Insert Plant dialog pops open. I can now browse in the plant database for a specific species. Let's search for Jacaranda. Here it is. We can define an approximate height. I'll check a random rotation and natural variation, which will add variation in rotation and height for my population, as to approximate reality. Click OK to validate. Then click to define the insertion point in the view. We can keep inserting plants and changing their values from the Edit panel. When done, right-click to end the command. Once the plant has been inserted, we can always select it and change its parameters from the Edit panel. Let's take a look at the Plant Database tool. By going to the Lance Tools tab, click in the Plant Database icon. The dialog is divided into 3 parts. On the top left, we'll find all the filters. It'll allow us to search for specific species according to the different criteria. Below the filter area, we'll find the results of our search, meaning the species that match the selected criteria. Then on the right-hand panel, we'll find images and different visual representation modes for the selected species. The filter area can be hidden by unchecking the filter box, or the climatic zones can be collapsed. If we click on any of the visual representations, we'll be able to change the block assigned to that species. It'll open the technical sheet of the selected plant, then click the Edit box, so we can change the 2D crown, the 3D conceptual shape, the detailed shape, or under the Render tab, the realistic representation of the selected species. We can also modify the species information, morphology, or characteristics. Let's go back to the plant database. We can also create new species from scratch by clicking on the New Species button. It will open an empty form where we can populate all the different fields with these different values. We can then assign different blocks for the 2D and 3D representations of our new species by browsing in the folder where all the blocks are stored. If you have your own 2D representation, you can add it into that folder. They're just 3DM files containing the block. Then go ahead and assign the rest of the representation modes. You can duplicate an existing species and edit the copy as a starting point for a new plant. In this drop-down list, we'll find different grouping modes to display the species list. For instance, the group with render, which shows plants that own a realistic representation. You can identify the ones that don't have a realistic representation because the preview will be gray. We can show all species, our favorite ones, the ones that have been tagged with the heart icon, and last, the list of the ones that have a render for vertical gardens. We can use the search bar to look for specific species. like an Acer platanoids. Let's check its properties and modify, for example, the realistic representation assigned to it by clicking on the Change button. You'll notice it uses different file types, for instance, the rplantx extension or the rtree extension, depending on the plant editor used to generate them. If we go back to the plant dialog, we can launch the plant editor used to generate the realistic representation for this species. We can go ahead and play with all the parameters. As you can see, there are quite a lot of options. We can continue editing it until we find the desired appearance. We can assign specific textures for the trunk, also for the foliage. We can enable flowers and select an image for the flower. We can then proceed to saving these changes as a new definition and assign it to a specific season. To do this, click on the plus button and then check the different seasonal options available, like summer, late spring. In the drop-down menu, you'll find the other definitions already created for this species. The plant definition inserted is dependent of the season set in the document properties, meaning that the visual representation of the plant will adapt according to the setting. Let's now open a new file. You'll find the various templates to generate different species. For example, let's select conifer. Play with the parameters from scratch and save the file locally. You can later assign it to a new species or an existing one. Now let's close these dialogues. Cancel the changes. Let's take a look at paint mode, another way to insert plants in the file. We can click on the third icon and browse for a new species. I'll search a rose plant in the database. I'll pick the rose grandiflora and click OK. Since this type offers several realistic displays, we need to select the one we want. Make sure natural variation and random rotation are enabled. Click OK. Then after the first click with the mouse, the plants will be inserted along the mouse cursor as I drag it around the scene. If I click again, paint mode will stop. Clicking once more, it'll toggle it back on. You'll notice we can switch to erase mode by clicking on the command line option, so that when I click, I can delete plants as I hover over them with a mouse pointer. Again, in a paint mode style. Right-click to end the command. If we take a look at the Edit panel, we can see that we've got two species in the Edit panel list. We can hide them by clicking on this icon, as well as hide all items for the same species. By selecting any of these species, we can change the 2D and 3D representation block, which will apply to that document only. If we made these changes in the plant database directly, it would affect all other documents. If we switch to the 2D representation, we will see the 2D ground symbols of the plant in the scene. In this dialog, we could switch from crayon drawings to setting out symbols. The other way to insert individual plants is by using the Plant from Points option. Let's imagine we have the exact location for the plants. I'll start by adding a few points with the point command. We'll click on the Plant from Points icon, the second one in the toolbar. The dialog brings back the species we've already used, so we'll browse for a new species. I'll search for a lemon tree. Here I can define the approximate height. Now back to the viewport, I'll switch to wireframe display mode to select these points more easily. Then back to shaded mode to preview the insertion. We'll now learn how to arrange plants in rows. We'll use this platform to define our row of plants. I will run the plant row command. I'm going to browse for a new plant species. For example, this Washington Philifera. Under the Plant tab, I'll define the dimensions of the plant. And under the Row tab, I can define the different row parameters. I'll set a clearance of 10 meters between each item, and the distance to the axis to 0. I'll validate. Now I can either select an existing curve or draw it by picking on one of the command line options. I'll switch to the top viewport, select the spline option, and start drawing the path of the row. Placing points. Following the curvature. You'll observe that the plants have not been positioned on the platform surface itself. This is because it's detecting the terrain underneath. If we tag this element as a terrain, the plants will be set on top of it. There we go. Of course, now other objects like this wall have been also projected on top of the new targeted terrain, producing this weird effect. We need to set it to Do Not Adjust to the Terrain by clicking on the option in the Edit panel. Now, let's learn how to combine different species in a single row. If we increase the row to a total of 2 elements, a new item will be listed in the Plant Rows section. Then we can click on either to change its plant type to one species or another. Go to the Plant tab, click on Browse to access the plant database. I'll search and select a specific species and validate. In the viewport, we can select the whole row and change the separation to 5 meters, for instance. We can also change the size of the plant by selecting one of the listed species and moving the age slider. In this part, we will populate this empty area of the terrain with a forest. We will run the forest command and browse in the plant database for a new species. I'll look for Pinus. For example, this Pinus pinea. Once selected, let's define its properties, such as approximate height. I'll make sure that both natural variation and random rotation are checked. This will give it a more realistic feeling. Under the Forest tab, we can define the parameters for the forest. we'll keep it at 100 units, with a minimum distance of 5 meters between each unit. We'll check other parameters later on. Let's click OK. Now we have the option to either select an existing curve as a forest boundary, or draw it by using any of the command line options. So from the top viewport, I'll switch to the 2D view. I'll click on the polyline option to start drawing the boundary for the forest on the terrain. I don't really need to close it because as soon as I right-click to end the command, the boundary closes itself automatically. Now, let's select the forest and change its properties from the Lands Edit panel. For example, we can change the number of units to 80, or we can check the Array option to distribute the plants evenly in a quadrangular alignment. You'll find a few options available to change the spacing of this distribution. Let's go back to the random distribution of units. Another way to change the setting is by selecting Forest and clicking on this Redistribute action. We can continue clicking to iterate between different solutions. Another action we can do is to add a hole into the boundary area of the forest. This way it'll add a clearance inside of it. I'll click Add Hole. I'll pick a closed curve that I had previously drawn. And when I right-click, the trees within the curve disappear. I'm going to switch to a 3D view. Go back to the perspective view so we can appreciate how the trees have been projected on the terrain. In the same way we combine species for rows, we can do it for forests. Let's select the forest, and the panel will increase the number of elements to 2. You can see how the list increases to 2 plant species attached to this forest. We can select each item separately, and from the Plant tab, browse for a different species. I'll choose Pinus pinister this time. For the second species in the list, I'll simply change some of the parameters available. Another way to create a forest is by selecting the zones. In this case, I'm going to generate a forest of plants in this area by using the following option. Run the forest command again, browse for the plant database. Let's search for a new species. I'll change the height. Under the Forest tab, I'll change the number of units, the clearance. Once I validate, I'm prompted to select a zone, for which I'll select the surface. And now the specified area is populated with the plants. A third way in which we can use the forest command is to create vertical gardens. For example, I'll add some green panels to this existing wall. Let's isolate the visibility for this object first. I'll be looking at it from this left side. So I'll move to this viewport and change the view to left. Now I'll run the forest commands. I'll select one of the species specific for vertical gardens. We'll find it listed in the top drop-down menu. I'll choose the Tradescantia pallida, which offers two definitions. We'll select the one for vertical gardens. And again, under the Forest tab, I can define the number of units and the minimum distance between each. I'll click on OK and draw the boundary for this forest in this left view. For this, I'll select the rectangle option in the command line, which will allow me to draw the forest perpendicular to the view. Let's check it out in the perspective view. Zooming out, I can see that the forest has been placed far in front of the actual wall. We can move it to the right location in the top viewport by dragging it with a gumball until we position it exactly at the level of the wall. I need to rotate it just a tad. And adjust its location again. Now I'll open the sun panel. This way I can play with its parameters until I find a better lighting. You'll notice here how all the plants were projected onto the terrain. This happened because when we inserted the forest, the Adjust to Terrain option was enabled. So we need to deactivate it in the Lands Edit panel. Let's unhide everything to retrieve the entire project again. Let's select our newly created vertical garden and hover over to the panel to change its parameters. For example, let's decrease the minimum distance to get a denser forest with a higher number of units. Let's play again with the sun settings until we get more light in the scene. Now we'll move on to creating shrubs. We'll use this empty space over here to go over some of the shrub features. So I'll work from the top viewport, switch to 2D representation, and to start, I'll offset that curve, which I'll use to generate the shrub. I'll run the offset command. I'll set it to 1 meter for the offset distance, maybe 0.8. Now we're ready to run the shrub command. Let's browse for a royal purple species. I'll set the drop-down list to all. And select this one. Then validate. In the box under the Shrub tab, I can play with the shrub settings. For the distribution, shrubs can be generated by meter, square meter, or in an array. I'll select the first option, by linear meter. I'll uncheck the hatch. Shrubs are represented in 2D with a hatch pattern, but since I already have a zone defined, it's not necessary. I'll select this curve. I can see the shrub 2D representation around the curve. I will switch to 3D, go to Perspective, and there it is. Now let's select it and go to the panel to explore the other distribution methods. I'll start with square meters. The plants fill the entire curve area according to the density set in the panel, which we can increase or decrease in the entry box. We can also use the forest parameters to distribute the shrub. So when you select this last option, a new Forest tab appears, where we can access the same features as with a regular forest. In this case, the number of units is set to 100, but since the minimum distance is too high, it could only insert 4. If we decrease this value, we'll be able to fit in more units. Let's now try the array option. change some of the settings. Alright, let's go back to linear meter distribution and change it to be 1 unit per meter. Under the Plant tab, change the height of the plants. We have now completed the insertion of all the station elements in the project, using the vegetation commands we have seen so far. Now, we will see how to insert ground covers as well. We'll focus on this area to see how it works. I'm going to work from the top viewport, where we will find a closed curve that we can use as a ground cover boundary. I will switch to 2D representation. Run the ground cover commands. Then I can select one species for the ground cover. These species are using a realistic file type that is specific to ground covers. So when we browse in the plant database, we will only see the species that are using this file format. I'll select the first one. I'll set the density to 100 and the plant scale to 0.6. For the 2D representation, ground covers use a hatch pattern and a wavy contour. Since I've already defined here the zone, I will uncheck this option. I'll click OK. I can draw the boundary curve using one of the command line boundary options. I will use this existing curve instead. We can see this wavy contour in the 2D representation. But if we switch back to the 3D visualization and go to the perspective view, we can see the ground cover in that area. Let's select it and change the parameters in the Edit panel. For example, we can change the plant scale to 1. In the same way we used a forest to create a vertical garden, ground covers can also be used to create green walls. Let's isolate these two objects again. Do a zoom on the selected objects. I've opened the light panel to turn on the skylight and have more light in the scene. Now I could create a ground cover using the same method as the forest. In this case, I'll extract the boundary curve of the forest to use it for the ground cover. So let's go to the Lands Edit panel and click on the Extract Curves setting. Then I can run the ground cover command. Click in the drop-down menu, select the same species we used before, validate, and pick the curve. Let's show all objects back again. I can now turn the skylight off. Now the scene is complete with all the different types of vegetation elements. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching.